Let's go to Paul Lane. He is on line 6. Hello, sir.
Good afternoon, Pete. How are you doing?
Not bad at all. And I oftentimes forget to mention, but you are the MHA, the independent MHA for Southlands, Mount Pearl. And you must have heard the conversation we had earlier about accessibility, I'm thinking.
I certainly did. I was listening to Craig Reed. Mm-hmm. Craig is actually a constituent of mine. And to be honest with you, when I sort of got involved in this whole issue around, accessibility and so on, it was really Craig that introduced me to it. At the time, it was something, Pete, that if you're not somebody who has a disability of your own and requires accessibility, it's not something that necessarily comes to mind. And I can remember Craig calling me up. That's a few years back now, and we actually went out and we drove around a lot of the buildings and parking lots and so on around Mount Pearl, public ones, private ones, so on. And he pointed out to me issues around curb cut downs and blue zones and proper signage and all those types of things. And there were things that didn't necessarily occur to me because I wasn't using them.
Exactly.
And
I have no understanding of the trouble that tall people have in the world either. I mean, you know what your experience tells you, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. Exactly right. So, but very quickly, your eyes are open. You're saying, my goodness. And so then, you look at, okay, well, what role do we have to play as members of the House Assembly, as legislators, to make things better, to make things accessible and inclusive and so on. And so I very quickly lobbied on Craig's behalf and on behalf of people with disabilities at the time, the PC government. And there was some legislation that was brought in, but it certainly didn't go far enough. The 1981 rule never should have been put there the way it was written. And certainly the issue around blue zone fines and so on was never, wasn't done properly either. So I spent the last 2 years when I was in opposition with the Liberals, calling on the government to make changes to the blue zone fines, because like right now we have a situation where City of St. John's and Mount Pearl and so on, they charge $400 if you park in a blue zone, but yet if you park on a government building site, it's only $100. If you park at Munn in a blue zone, it's only $20, and which is definitely wrong. And so I had lobbied the PC government at the time for 2 years. Unfortunately, they chose to ignore what we were trying to say. And certainly when we first formed government, the Liberals did, and Minister Joyce was appointed as the Minister for Service NL. I immediately spoke to him about it. Certainly he was aware of it. And I pointed out the legislation that needed to be changed. I actually put it in writing and gave him the sections and my recommendations for wording and so on. And he was very much on board with it. And in fairness to Minister Joyce, I believe that I'm hoping that he probably still is. But of course, the last session of the House, I was hoping it was going to come through at that point. But then again, it's the budget session. Not a lot of legislation generally goes through. This is mostly what's known as the legislative session to fall. So that's why I haven't really spoken out a lot on it. I wanted to give Minister Joyce the benefit of the doubt and hope now that when the House opens soon that there will be some changes made to the legislation to deal with blue zones and
but is legislation required to address all of these recommendations that came through? I mean, I haven't heard anything about them, and Mr. Joyce has never brought them up when I've talked to him about various things, and he wouldn't necessarily, because we talk about specific issues when he calls in. But we're reaching out to him. Here's the thing, and by the way, I want to clear up something, because someone else sent me an email and said that there was something left out of the conversation. I have heard from Mr. Reed again, and he says all businesses are entitled to the exemption as is written. The intention in this particular case was for heritage buildings, and if you do less than 50% renos of the value of the building, you don't have to become compliant. But he says government services at all levels, municipal, provincial, federal, have to be accessible. There are no exemptions.
Absolutely, and that would be my interpretation as well. And we have a number of government facilities and so on that are not acceptable and that are not accessible. That's totally unacceptable.
Yeah.
And even when it comes to private buildings and so on, Pete, when we talk about the spirit and the intent here, and I guess that's part of the argument, I can understand if we had a heritage building in the downtown St. John somewhere where you have very narrow, doorways and no sidewalks and different things like that, where it would be challenging,
or it would ruin the heritage nature of the building to do so.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, but we're talking about public buildings and public services, right?
Well, we're talking both. We're talking about public buildings, public services, for which there is absolutely zero excuse. You need to make it accessible. And like I said, even when we're talking about private facilities, the way I would view it is that, if you have a building and that building has lots of space, plenty of room to put a ramp, and could quite easily put a wider door and accessible bathroom, then I don't care if it was built in 1981 or 1921. If the space is there and it can be reasonably done, then I think that it should be done. But certainly, as I said, when we're talking about public facilities, everybody has the right. We're all taxpayers. Everybody has the right to enter government buildings and public facilities, avail of those services, and no government, regardless of the stripe, have any right, as far as I'm concerned, to deny anybody access to public facilities. And that's really what Craig is saying. That's what I've been saying for a long time. Pete, the other point I just wanted to quickly make as well is that one of the other things, and this happened during the last election campaign, of course, and I attended a debate. It was held at Easter Seals, and it was a debate around accessibility and so on. And in that particular debate, I, on behalf of the Liberals at the time, had announced that we would be introducing a Disabilities Act for Newfoundland and Labrador. And if you look at the mandate letter for Minister Gammon Walsh, it's in her mandate letter to do so. But the last conversation I had, albeit it was a while back now, with Minister Gammon Walsh's office, they had opted. I said, well, where are we to? Are we going to get a committee together now? Are we going to start working on this Disabilities Act? How is this all going to work? And I was basically told that, no, we're going to wait and see if the feds do something. Now, I don't know if the feds are planning on putting in a National Disabilities Act. If that's happening, when it's happening, I have no idea. But there are other provinces that have Disabilities Acts, and we could be waiting for years before the federal government ever puts one into place. So to simply say we're going to just shelve this now and wait and see what the federal government does, that's also unacceptable.
Well,
so
then you got the federal government. Federal government can stay and say we're going to wait for the provinces to come up with it, and we're going to follow their lead, and then you're in stalemate. Yeah, I wish they'd call it the Abilities Act, though. I wish they'd call it the Abilities Act, because it's really all about making people able to get to and do the things they need to do. So maybe we should call it the Abilities Act.
Well, yes, I mean, absolutely, and I'm sure that there's people that would say that that's exactly what it should be, and you're right, Pete. But whatever we should decide to call it, the bottom line is what we're talking about is equality. We're talking access, and everybody deserves to have that, whether it be to enter businesses and establishments, or whether it be to avail of government services. And absolutely, when we're talking about government services, I mean, I was absolutely appalled to hear Craig talk about the fact that the Minister of Education was saying that, we got a bunch of libraries, they're not acceptable, and by too bad, that's it. They're not going to be accessible. I mean, if that's what was said, and I'm only going by what Craig had indicated there, then, I mean, to my mind, that is absolutely unacceptable. If we have public services, public buildings, then they have to be accessible to all.
We're just talking about making stuff fair. Fair to everybody.
Listen, that's exactly what we're talking about. I mean, as I said, we are all of us are citizens. We all, I mean, there's many people that have accessibility issues, that they work the same as you and I, they pay taxes the same as you and I, they have families the same as you and I, and why should they not be entitled to the same degree of services and programs and accessibility as you and I?
Yeah.
No reason why they shouldn't. And as Craig indicated, when we're talking about accessibility issues, we're not necessarily talking about the person who who has to utilize a wheelchair or so on. We could be talking about seniors and so on, issues around arthritis, people with heart disease or whatever that can't walk long distances, need to have parking in close proximity. There's all kinds of things and all kinds of people. And with the aging population, we're going to see more and more need. And so that's why we need to make sure that we start introducing things like universal design and making sure that when we, whether we're constructing things or we're going to be offering services and programs, that they are available for everybody and in a format and in a way that everybody can avail of it.
Yep. Sounds good. Okay, we'll get there, but one step at a time. Let's work on this, and then we'll look at all the other things we need to consider.
Absolutely, Pete. And like I said, I called on Minister Gamma Walsh to explain to us or to I guess let us know where she stands now on the Disabilities Act. Like I said, at the time she said she's going to wait for the feds. That's not good enough. And as for Minister Joyce, like I said, in fairness to him, I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt that when the House Assembly opens and we get into the legislative session that we're going to see some positive changes. If that doesn't happen, then you'll hear from me, but I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt that it will.
Well, we'll wait for him to call us and tell us that we're actually going to see something in this session of the House. Thanks very much, sir.
I'm pretty sure he was committed to doing it, and I think he will. So we'll see.
Okay, fingers crossed. Thanks again.
Okay, thank you, Pete.
Bye-bye.